I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. President Trump delivers his first State of the Union address tomorrow night. He's expected to cite economic progress during his time in office while pushing for bipartisanship with Democrats. The White House says Trump will point to a robust economy and low unemployment, as well as the benefits of the tax overhaul. For a second time, independent Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders will offer his personal response to the State of the Union address. Sanders will deliver the speech via social media, and the formal Democratic response will be delivered by Massachusetts Democratic Congressman Joe Kennedy. President Trump reportedly erupted in anger while flying to Davos, Switzerland, after learning that a top DOJ official had warned against releasing a classified memo. It had outlined alleged misdeeds at the FBI and Justice Department related to the Russia investigation. The official said the move would be extraordinarily reckless. 4 months after Maria hit Puerto Rico, officials say thousands are still living in hotels. Reimbursements from FEMA are running out, and many say they can't afford temporary housing. More than 70,000 homes were destroyed by the hurricane. Another 300,000 more are still damaged. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti, and this is Bloomberg.
Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, big tech's big week of earnings. We will set the stage for what's been a record-breaking quarter. Plus, Michael Dell is now looking to bring his tech empire under one publicly traded roof. We will explain. And Taiwan may be positioning itself to become the next cryptocurrency hub in Asia following the crackdowns in China and South Korea. Our full coverage from Taiwan straight ahead. But first, to our lead. We are getting ready for a slew of big tech earnings this week. On Tuesday, AMD and Juniper. Wednesday, Facebook, Microsoft, and Qualcomm. Thursday, Alphabet, Amazon, and Apple. And there was a common theme in tech earnings from the last quarterly reports. The sector knocked it out of the park. Shares in Alphabet, Amazon, and others hit records following their latest reports, and analysts are expecting much of the same when the season gets into full swing this week. Joining us now from New York, Kathy Wood, CEO of ARK Investment, and here in San Francisco, Bloomberg Tech's Julie Verhage. Kathy, I will start with you. Let's talk about the earnings that you are watching. What are you following most closely? What are you most optimistic about?
Well, I think we're taking our cues from companies like Netflix, which are showing us that once you get into the sweet spot of an S-curve, you see exponential growth, accelerated growth. We're seeing this when market shares cross 10, 15, 20%. We're seeing that in certainly streaming media as a percent of total media. We're seeing it in mobile advertising as a percent of total global advertising. Right now, that's around 17%, right in the sweet spot of the S-curve. Facebook and Google own that space. Wouldn't be surprised to see surprises there. Amazon is entering that space. So you've got Facebook at roughly, I think Google at 73 billion last year, Facebook roughly 40 billion, Amazon just a little below 3 billion. It's nosing in, but it has the most valuable advertisers because they are ready to buy, and advertisers want to be right where the purchasers are.
Now, Julie, you've been breaking it all down. What are analysts saying?
Analysts are still really optimistic on this sector. A number of these names outside of GoPro reporting later this week as well. They were some of the best performers in the markets last year. And that was important also because these names account for a larger portion of big indices like the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So even if someone doesn't actually own a share of Facebook or Apple, they're still going to see an impact depending on how these companies do when they report numbers later this week.
Kathy, let's zoom in on Apple. There's been some concerns about the popularity of the iPhone 10, especially in countries like China. Of course, they've got 3 models out. This is very unusual, the 8, the 8 Plus, and the iPhone 10. Does that concern you?
No, it doesn't. Always at this time of year, we get these jitters. Last year, it was the same thing, and the stock did extremely well throughout the year. And the channel checks happened to be wrong. I don't know if they're right or wrong this time, but I know that Apple is changing its complexion as a company. We think the killer apps out there are in healthcare using artificial intelligence. They're integrating into a lot of healthcare systems around the world. And also augmented reality. We think that's a killer app in the industrial space for them. And add those to the other services, which are about 25% of their revenues. And we've got the makings of a very different company.
Julie, I want to dig in a little bit to Alphabet and Facebook. Obviously, these are the two biggest competitors in the online ad market. Both of them have been facing controversy around fake news, Facebook especially. Do we think that's going to play into the results this quarter?
I mean, I would be very surprised if someone like Mark Zuckerberg does not address, the changes to the news feed and different things that have happened since the company's last earnings report. This will be the analyst's first chance to even ask them on the earnings call following the report, what impact this is going to see. So far, the stocks have still performed well, so it seems like they're very optimistic at this point, but I wouldn't be surprised for something that Mark or someone else on the call says to, make that tick back a little bit as well. And the other thing you have to consider that's important in a lot of these reports is the cloud share of their revenue. There's a reason firms like Amazon can offer you same-day or two-day shipping for free, right? It's because they make so much of their money on Amazon Web Services. If all of a sudden that revenue starts to tick down a little bit, you could see those shares fall a little bit, because even continued into this year after a record performance last year, they've done very well. And analysts are very optimistic on what they're going to see on Wednesday and Thursday.
Amazon also increasingly becoming a bigger player in the online ad market. Kathy, what do you think about the changes to Facebook's news feed? I mean, historically, advertisers really haven't had much of a choice when Facebook changes its policies. That seems to be the same today. Do you think this will materially impact the amount of revenue that they bring in?
Well, it could in the short term, but we really think that Facebook is doing the right thing. It has always done the right thing to keep engagement going, and clearly it was getting some kind of signal from consumers that that engagement might have been tailing off. We think ASPs are going to offset. The value of Facebook's advertising is going to go up. It's going to be harder to reach those consumers. So we think the prices are going to go up.
So, Julie, moving on then to Amazon, you talked a little bit about the cloud. We know they've made some changes to Prime membership. We know that they recently bought Whole Foods. They're launching Amazon Go. Obviously, they're investing heavily in the future of the company. Will this impact the bottom line?
I mean, it could, but it shows like Jeff Bezos has never been afraid to make investments that he thinks are going to pay off in the future. You also have pharmacy that we haven't mentioned yet that they've been debating on, making further strides in. It almost seems like there's no industry that Amazon can't enter into at this point, whether it's through a partnership or just straight up buying a company like you saw with Whole Foods late last year. Anything that Bezos thinks is going to pay off, he's not afraid to go ahead and make a mark in.
So, Kathy, if you had to pick, where are you most bullish? I mean, all these stocks are doing well, but where are you putting the majority of your money?
Well, we happen today to be focusing on stocks that really are in the sweet spot of this S-curve, so this 10 to 20% market share range of a trend. So we like all of them. We think most of them are in our top 10. We're taking profits to invest in other stocks that might be a little beaten up by the earnings season. That would be in other areas of the market, like genomics had been, and those are starting to pay off nicely. But these are keepers. Whenever you're in the sweet spot of the S-curve, you really shouldn't sell, just adjust position sizes to limit risk in the long run.
How long does this remain in the sweet spot? I mean, how long does the rally keep up?
Well, these S-curves can last years. I mean, as I said, online retail in the United States has just hit 10% of total retail. We have just started. Mobile advertising as a percent of total global advertising, only 17%. Really just lifting off. Streaming media as a percent of total media consumption, really 10% by some measurements, a little higher than that by others. Just starting off. So really what we're learning is the tech and telecom bubble in the late 90s was onto something big. It was just way too early. It's happening now.
All right, Kathy Wood, CEO of ARK Investment, and our Bloomberg Tech reporter, Julie Burhage. Thank you both so much for breaking it all down. Lots to cover there. A stock we are watching, Twitter, up as much as 5% in Monday trade on speculation that the company is shopping itself around. This following a tweet by Fox Business's Charlie Gasparino that an analyst told him the company is open to any and all conversations. Coming up, we will explain why Michael Dell is looking to bring all the pieces of his tech empire under one publicly traded roof. Next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. In deals news, Microsoft has acquired PlayFab. PlayFab is a provider of services to build, launch, and grow cloud-connected games. The company's tools are designed for developer use across platforms. Terms of the deal were not disclosed. PlayFab counts Atari, Disney, and Rovio as some of the biggest entertainment companies that use its services. Well, Michael Dell is finally ready to bring all the pieces of his technology empire under one publicly traded roof. The billionaire's ultimate goal is to create a structure that would help his two companies, Dell Technologies and VMware, better manage a massive debt load. This according to people familiar with the matter. Bloomberg's Alex Barinka broke this story and joins me now here in the studio. I know you've been working the phones all day. You had some news last week that they were interested in a number of different options. Explain what's on the table right now.
So it seems like the end game is to get this company public and to bring together all of Michael Dell's kind of tech empire into one corporate structure. And you'll remember that is not only Dell, which was taken private a number of years ago, and EMC, which it went out and paid $67 billion for, but there's also VMware. When Dell bought EMC, EMC owned the majority stake in VMware.
80%.
80%. The rest of that is publicly traded and is still publicly traded. So right now, this option for them to get public would look like a VMware takeover of Dell. So publicly traded VMware would use its stock to take over Dell. Dell would become a public company through that acquisition and would actually become the parent company, with VMware's management staying in place in a business unit within Dell in this entire thing. And
so would the whole company be called Dell?
We don't know exactly what it would be called yet. It seems like Michael Dell, the man, likes to keep his name on things, but my sources did not have any intel on what it would be called. But it is an intriguing kind of situation that is being laid out here by my sources, with the end game of, as you said, getting it public, paying down debt, and basically simplifying the corporate structure. And there's another key point to this simplification. You'll remember when Dell bought EMC, they needed to figure out how to finance that $67 billion takeover. They brought on a lot of debt, but they also raised cash by selling a tracking stock for the stake that they were taking over in VMware that was a part of EMC. So that stock still trades under the ticker DVMT. It's supposed to track the value of VMware, and it right now has about a $15 billion market cap. Well, that stock would be somehow subsumed either through a stock swap or through cash to then take all of these kind of novel, interesting, sort of strange financial pieces and bring them together.
Speaking of Michael Dell, the man, you know, when he made this giant transaction, there was always a question of, well, how long would this status quo remain? And I asked him last year if he had any plans to change the structure. Take a listen to what he told me then.
We don't have any plans to change our structure. We're very happy with our privately controlled structure. You know, we have two public companies in the group, and you know, it's working quite well.
So now it sounds like the tune is changing.
Plans have changed, and the board will be probably making a decision at the end of this month and the last few days of January here at their board meeting. And you have to remember, there's an end goal here, right? To get everything together and to service this debt. We've talked a lot about that since breaking the news last week. They have more than $40 billion worth of debt, and VMware, frankly, throws off a lot of cash. It'd be really nice if Michael Dell could get his hands on some of that cash, raise some equity potentially through equity markets, and pay that down. And also, if he's a public company, this would also give him additional ammo down the road if he wanted to change that corporate structure anymore and make some more acquisitions. So it seems like he's kind of taking a next advanced step to take this complicated structure that he's created and simplify it and get it out the door for public market investors.
What would it mean for VMware? I spoke to Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of VMware, at that same conference where I spoke with Michael, and he seemed pretty happy with the current structure. And in fact, you know, even though Dell had some conflicting relationships with potential partners, VMware was still able to pursue those partnerships.
So my sources are telling me that he would stay in place, the management team would basically stay in place because it's been such a gem. They're saying that even though we don't know exactly what Dell and EMC's financials look like, VMware is surpassing them right now. Why fix something that ain't broke? So VMware would be kind of part of this business. And remember, they sell services that kind of run on top of the core of Dell and EMC's business, which is those servers and those applications. VMware, with its virtualization technology, helps bring all of that together. So some of those partner relationships might have to be sussed out. I know that they'll be thinking about that down the line, but I'm sure that if they're thinking about doing some kind of combination like this, they're thinking about the strategic operational implications as well.
All right, Alex Barinka, our deals reporter, working hard. Thank you so much for that update. Coming up, cryptocurrencies continue to face serious hurdles in Asia, but one country is looking to be the next big hub for these digital assets. We're going to go to Taiwan next. And a feature I'd like to bring to your attention, our interactive TV function. Find it at TV Go on the Bloomberg. You can watch us live. If you miss an interview, you can go back to it. You can send our producers a message, play along with the charts that we show you on air. This is for Bloomberg subscribers only. Check it out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg. A story we are watching, Japan's Coincheck says it was hacked after it lost almost $500 million in digital tokens last Friday. The episode has prompted calls for stricter industry oversight. Officials at Japan's finance ministry said the country will conduct on-site inspections of exchanges, and cryptocurrencies will most likely become an issue at the next G20 meeting. Meantime, Polychain Capital has decided not to go public in Canada after holding talks with bankers about an initial public offering. Polychain, which invests in blockchain assets, had approximately $250 million under management as of last September. The crypto hedge fund is backed by venture firm Sequoia Capital and Andreessen Horowitz. And sticking with cryptos, Taiwan may be positioning itself to become the next cryptocurrency hub in Asia, following the crackdowns in China and South Korea. But as our chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel reports, the theft of $500 million from the Coincheck exchange in Japan is raising fresh concerns about fraud. Take a listen.
The 23 Brew Company in Taipei is at the intersection of old versus new. In a micro sort of way, it's an establishment that is challenging the establishment, or at very least, the established way of buying around. You see, patrons here can, if they so desire, pay for their microbrew pints with Bitcoin.
We've always been forward-thinking here, so we want to help support Bitcoin and help kickstart that in Taiwan. You know, give power back to the people.
In light of the Coincheck heist in Japan and crackdowns in China and South Korea, Taiwan is still trying to figure out where it stands on cryptocurrencies. Should the government and regulators suppress the market or set it free? Broker MyCoin believes Taiwan's state of statelessness, if you will, works to its advantage.
This sort of awkward position that Taiwan finds itself in this world is not unlike the awkward position that Bitcoin finds itself in the regulatory or in the established banking world. I'd like Taiwan to be known as the ROC, except this time around it's the Republic of Cryptography.
I think we should really take advantage of this wave and really fill the void that's been left in this region.
Chu says within the government here, risk aversion and red tape run deep. And yet, led by a younger breed of lawmakers like Xu, the Legislative Yuan did pass a regulatory sandbox bill late last month to allow fintech experimentation. As for initial coin offerings here, that could be tougher, given the fraud and money laundering fears.
I think right now it seems that government is passive or choose to avoid talking about it, but you can't really run it away from it because it would just go underground and it would have a lot of implications. For me, I think Taiwan can become a ICO trading hub in Asia.
You know, what happened on the mainland was too much too soon, and it violated that fundamental tenet of do no harm. Here in Taiwan, things are a bit slower, you can say, but in a way safer as well.
For now, Taiwan is taking perhaps some more palatable first steps into the crypto world.
Once you start seeing that Bitcoin sticker in more and more places, I think people will start to get into it and say, oh, wow, I can actually use Bitcoin in my everyday life. And this is where they can start having a beer at the local pub.
And joining us now, our Bloomberg Chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engel, who spent all last week in Taipei. So, Stephen, do you think this coin check heist situation derails Taiwan's hope of perhaps becoming a cryptocurrency hub?
Yeah, it depends on who you ask whether this is good or bad. It could, of course, enhance regulation. It could enhance oversight, but it also could put a damper, of course, on the kind of innovation that Taiwan is trying to achieve, at least a younger breed of lawmaker that is trying to facilitate this revolution, if you will, if you want to call it that, through that Innovation Act that they did pass on December 29th. But it's interesting, this whole story in Japan blew up just as I was wrapping up my reporting, and boy, did I get a lot of messages from the various people that I did talk about. They were also wondering how this was going to play out, because keep in mind, the cautionary tale for Taiwan has always been what has happened in China with the fraud there. Japan was always looked upon as being kind of the model for which to build a cryptocurrency hub in Asia.
So, you know, Taiwan obviously has a lot of advantages. There's a lot of processing power on the island. How could we see them exploit some of these advantages? You know, what about Bitcoin mining?
Oh, mining. Yeah, that was a question, of course, that was put to Taiwan Semiconductor, TSMC, in its latest results when they showed a big pop-up in revenue that led to the bottom line for their latest results from all that processing chips that are needed for mining. But, you know, it needs a lot of power, and this was a big concern of some of the lawmakers that I talked to. Taiwan can do, you know, a few things really well, but once they start stretching that power grid, which they do in the summertime when all those factories, the chip factories and the like, start cranking up their air conditionings, there is severe power shortages in Taiwan, especially in the summertime. In fact, when we were doing live hits with you that morning last week, the whole neighborhood went black because of a power outage. So that is probably going to prevent Taiwan, at least for now, being a mining hub.
Fascinating. All right. Stephen Engel for us there in Hong Kong, back from Taipei. Thank you so much, Stephen. Coming up, are your social media followers real people or bots? The latest battle heating up for social networks. That is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of your first word news. The White House is distancing itself from FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe's decision to step down.
We've seen the numerous reports, as all of you have, and any specifics, I can tell you none of this decision was made by that of the White House, and any specifics I would refer you to the FBI.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says President Trump stands by his criticism of the deputy director who played a central role in the Hillary Clinton email probe. Any trade deals negotiated by the UK during the 21-month Brexit transition period will be subject to EU approval. The bloc's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, made that clear today, while also defending the EU's goal to have a Brexit deal finalized by October. Britain will also have no say in EU decision-making during that transition period. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in Russia today to discuss Iran's expanding military presence in Syria and in neighboring Lebanon. Netanyahu accuses Tehran of trying to turn Lebanon into a de facto missile site for precision strikes against Israel. And Austrian police say some 150 skiers stuck on a broken chairlift at a resort for hours have now been rescued. The chairs were suspended about 30 feet above the ground. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg. Just after 5:30 p.m. here in Washington on a Monday evening, Tuesday morning, 6:30 a.m. in Hong Kong. We are joined by Bloomberg's David Ingles with a look at the markets. David, here in the States, I guess they all can't be record breakers every single day. Have to take a step back every now and then.
Yeah, otherwise that would just be weird. Right. What has been really weird is seeing some of these down days. Part of my sort of routine here in the Asia Pacific is when I wake up in the morning, I always obviously tend to check the markets. One of the first things I look at. And, more often than not, I look at green. Obviously, right now we're looking at maybe moderate declines at the open when you look at some of these futures in the Asia Pacific. We are coming off, of course, record highs in the region. We're getting into the thick of earnings season that might just provide a little bit of a lift. Some data to mention as well. We have jobless numbers, or the Japan jobless rate coming out in about an hour's time. That's something to latch onto as well as Australian business confidence. At the moment, futures pointing lower, as I mentioned. The dollar's fairly well supported. Yields on the way up as we get underway this Tuesday morning here in the Asia Pacific. I'm David Ingles here in Hong Kong. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
Bloomberg Technology, I'm Emily Chang. Over the weekend, New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman opened an investigation into Devumi, a company that sold millions of fake followers on social media platform. This follows the New York Times reporting of the obscure American company, which, according to the New York Times, collected millions of dollars in a shadowy global marketplace for social media fraud. Joining us from Arlington, Virginia, Rami Assad, founder of Distill Network, a cybersecurity company that specializes in destroying bot networks. And here in San Francisco, Renee DiResta, head of policy for data democracy, who has advised Congress on disinformation campaigns. In the past, you advised Congress before the meetings where Twitter, Facebook, and Google testified, Renee, and you've been researching this stuff for a very, very long time. I know you read the New York Times story. Did any of this surprise you?
No, I think the idea that influence is bought and sold on Twitter has been known for at least 4 or 5 years now.
Just how extensive is it?
I think the Times article did a great job of really getting deep into one particular instance. I believe that millions and millions of accounts, by Twitter's own responses to the questions for the record following the Senate hearing, they were saying that in September they were taking on 4 million fake accounts per week, of which they were capturing about 3 million prior to them going live on the platform. That's still a substantial amount that do participate in some way in public discourse after the time that they're created.
Now, Rami, you specialize in bot detection and mitigation. What sort of information do you have about, the numbers behind this, the sheer extent of these fake accounts?
Well, to Twitter's admission, about 5% of their users is made up of these fake accounts. I think other researchers have come up with higher numbers, 15, 20%. What's really interesting and important to note, it's not just about the volume of actual accounts, but the activity of those accounts. I think the impact of the fake accounts, because they're louder, they're tweeting more often, is much, much higher than being reported on or being talked about. And so I think what we're seeing, the impact of these fake accounts is 20, 30, 40% and more across the social activity.
And what do you know, Renee, about how what's happening on Twitter compares to what's happening on Facebook? It's a problem there as well.
It is. I think Twitter, it's much more visible for a couple of reasons. One, even outside researchers have some visibility into what's happening on Twitter because it is so public. On Facebook, it's a lot harder to track that because so much of the communication is happening in private groups. I think also on Twitter, there's a sense that what happens on Twitter is amplified more because the media picks it up, because a lot of journalists monitor the conversation on Twitter. So really, when we talk about kind of information integrity, Twitter is an absolutely critical piece of that puzzle.
So, in terms of how easily influence can be manipulated, give us some examples.
So I think one of the things, there's two general frameworks for the type of manipulation that was covered in the Times article. The first is the idea, we as a society and in the media in particular, the notion that someone with a high follower count is a person of influence or should be taken more seriously. That type of, buying a large collection of followers really can artificially, artificially creates a metric of importance that we've come to accept, and perhaps we shouldn't. And then the second, I think it's really the notion that, per the other guest's point, these accounts are tweeting a lot more often, so there's almost an information laundering that's happening here. If I want to spread a particular point of view, I can simply go out and purchase some bots and make them say a particular thing.
Like to vote for Donald Trump?
I actually think it's important to note it's really not a partisan issue at this point. We see this being done by corporates. It's called astroturfing when that happens. We see it being done to corporates when companies kind of fall afoul of some sort of social group, like the campaign against Ghostbusters is one example. So it's really more of a systemic problem. And that's why it needs to be addressed.
Rami, how would you describe the direction of these campaigns and what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think Renee made a really great point in that it's not partisan, but it's just one person in some campaign that puts their thumb on the scale. And we're interacting with social media thinking that we're having a one-to-one conversation or one-to-many conversation with other peers. As soon as you have somebody that wants to influence a campaign, they can use money, and not a lot of money, a really small sum, to influence the conversation and put their thumb on the scale to a really heavy bit. And it leans and it drives the conversation in a whole different angle. And we saw that with the election, but we've seen that in a number of ways. And so it makes us distrust our interactions with social media in general.
Renee, one of our producers, Candy Cheng, her husband deactivated his Facebook account 5 years ago, and suddenly he has reappeared on Facebook. In how many instances are these real people's identities being stolen or misappropriated, and how many of these are just fake people?
I think it's very, very difficult. I've seen that happen actually personally with two friends, gotten 2 friend requests, gone and looked, said, hey, did you change your account? Do you have a secret secondary account? And here, no. This has happened time and time again. It's so hard to get the platforms to take it seriously. Hillary Mason, a data scientist, actually put out a tweet storm on this, talking about the time she gave a talk at Grace Hopper, and all of a sudden hundreds and hundreds of troll accounts in her name, sorry, not troll accounts, fake accounts in her name were being created. It's very, very difficult to be on the receiving end of that. It's extremely hard to get the platforms to take action, unfortunately, and you have to do all of the legwork of filing report after report after report yourself. So it's, I think with the accounts that we saw released during the Senate hearings, I went and looked and noticed that a lot of the names that were used in the Twitter accounts were actually just kind of camel case, where they do first name, last name. And if you Google those names, you see that they're coming from some of the data brokers, places like White Pages, Spokeo, PQ, the places that kind of harvest user information and sell it to people for whatever whatever reason they might have. And unfortunately, once your name is on one of those sites, you have to do a lot of work to get it taken down. We've really created a framework where it's very, very easy to steal people's identities.
Rami, what can companies like yours do when you discover all these bots? Then what happens?
So we have a lot of clients that want to prevent bots from impacting their site, and they come to us to help identify the difference between bots and real people. We use machine learning, biometric interactions with the website to identify which are real people and which might be malicious bots, and help our clients filter that out. Now, once they're on there, if you're not one of our customers, then you really need to put some proactive measures in place to differentiate between the two. And we've seen some companies take a more aggressive tone, and some companies like Twitter, where we're seeing it more prolifically, take a more relaxed tone, like Renee was saying.
So Renee, what's it going to take to change this? Because the reality is this is traffic for these social networks.
It is traffic. I think that the platforms are very fond of saying they don't want to be arbiters of truth, but I think that it's absolutely critical that they be arbiters of integrity. And I think that ultimately, these types of stories coming out really does hurt their bottom line, because it erodes the trust of users. People don't believe that they're talking to real people on Twitter. People don't believe that the people that they're engaging with in groups on Facebook are real people. We've seen this erosion of trust systemically, and it's really difficult when our own public sphere becomes, increasingly, when levels of distrust rise in online communications between people. I think it's something that they ultimately have to get ahead of, and I think that media coverage like what came out in the Times is something that's really propelling this forward.
Now, you came on the show initially when you became a target yourself, and I remember it was, incredibly overwhelming. It was scary. Have you seen an actual improvement in the level of online harassment?
I actually have to some extent. I think that a lot of the protections that were rolled out for blue checkmark users being kind of passed down to have a more broad definition of what a low quality account is has quieted a lot of that for me. I think that it really depends what line of work you're in and how vocal you are, and if you participate in dialogue about particularly hot topics. I imagine my experience may be very different than other people's.
Right. Say anything controversial and you're gonna get jumped on. Renee DiResta, thank you so much. Data for Democracy, Rami Assad, Distill Networks founder. This is not going away. We're gonna keep talking about it. Thank you both. Well, Maxim shares are surging off reports that the chip maker is in discussions to be acquired by Japan's Renesas Electronics. CNBC citing people familiar with the matter. The stock surged as much as 27%, the biggest percentage rise since Maxim's 1988 initial public offering. A spokeswoman for Maxim said the company doesn't comment on rumors and speculation. Coming up, the Trump administration wants to take the reins of the nation's 5G wireless network, but it is an unlikely foe standing in the way. Standing in the way. Next, this is Bloomberg. The FCC is saying not so fast to the Trump administration. The Republican-led commission, along with the wireless industry, is pushing back against a U.S. plan to build a 5G network that could be subject to government supervision. FCC Chair Ajit Pai was resolute in his statement that this should be a free market endeavor, saying, "I oppose any proposal for the federal government to build and operate a nationwide 5G network. Any federal effort to construct a nationalized 5G network would be a costly and counterproductive distraction from the policies we need to help the United States win the 5G future." Joining us now from D.C., Bloomberg's Todd Shields, who covers the FCC. Fascinating statement from the commissioner there, Todd, especially in light of the net neutrality debate and the stand they took there. What do you make of it?
Well, he came out hard and early this morning against this floated proposal from somewhere inside the Trump administration. And I'll have to say, we're not entirely sure who within the administration backs this, whether it's just a trial balloon with momentum, unclear. But it is pretty clear that Ajit Pai at the FCC and, interestingly, all four of his colleagues are against it right now.
Talk to us about the concern with China here.
The national security officialdom, if you will, and they don't talk to the press a whole lot, have focused on two companies, Huawei and ZTE, which are both probably pretty well known to Bloomberg viewers. They're equipment makers. And there have been reports from Capitol Hill, there have been qualms coming from within the national security apparatus that these companies may be relaying or have the means to relay or in the future have the opportunity to relay information to Chinese security organs. So that seems to be perhaps at the root of this. There was a recent letter from Intelligence Committee members from both houses of Congress to Ajit Pai saying, please take a look at this. I got no response when I asked the FCC if they were. But there's a concern that as 5G networks grow up, become more powerful, that powerful equipment can be harnessed to the Chinese government's ends in the end rather than U.S. consumers.
So, before this news, when were we expecting to see 5G implemented?
Big race. AT&T and Verizon seem to have been saying sometime around the end of this year. Other predictions have been a little slower than that. There's a lot that has to go on in terms of the network, in terms of putting up antennas and other gear. 5G depends on a lot of little antennas. The signals don't go far, but they carry a lot of information, and they're very fast, but can be disrupted at times even by raindrops. So you have to put up a lot of antennas, and the FCC's been busy trying to clear the groundwork for that to ease the way for that kind of massive installation. Against, I will say, the opposition or the skepticism of some towns and cities that want to keep their rules on okaying these installations. The FCC is trying to, if you will, make the town and city regulations a little less objectionable from the telecom's point of view.
So once the FCC makes a statement like this, contrary to the administration, what happens? What is next?
we play on. We don't know. I'll point out that up on the Hill, where there's a lot of power concentrated, the number 2 Republican Senator, John Cornyn of Texas, and over in the House, the chairman of the Commerce Committee that oversees the FCC, Greg Walden of Oregon, both said they don't like this idea. But Sarah Sanders, the White House spokeswoman, said, well, look, we've only gone so far as to say we want a secure network. How we do it remains to be seen. So how much oomph does this have from within the administration? How hard does it push to get it done? What deals might it strike up on the Hill? Apparently none so far. We don't know, but it's worth keeping an eye out in coming weeks and months.
All right, Bloomberg's Todd Shields for us in Washington. Todd, thanks so much for breaking it down. Coming up, Apple is not content to just design and sell its line of products. It wants to own all the tech inside them as well. Apple's plans to build its processor chip empire next. This is Bloomberg. Elon Musk's tunneling startup, Boring Company, started selling a $500 branded weapon online over the weekend. Posting on Instagram, Musk said, quote, "I want to be clear that a flamethrower is a super terrible idea. Definitely don't buy one, unless you like fun." And it seems like his quirky promotions on social media are paying off. So far, Boring Company had taken orders for over 10,000 of these flamethrowers worth $5 million, according to a company spokesman. The money will be used to fund Musk's ambitious project to build underground transportation systems. The company began digging a 30-foot wide test tunnel in Los Angeles a year ago. Sticking with Elon Musk, it will be a sellout crowd when SpaceX has the first launch of its new Falcon Heavy rocket. NASA has sold out $195 tickets featuring a champagne toast and a commemorative glass. Musk's new rocket could be launched as soon as February 6th from Cape Canaveral. Apple has long been known as a powerhouse. It's just that most people think of it in terms of the iPhone, iPad, iMac, and more. But for the last several years, the Cupertino-based giant has been building itself into another kind of powerhouse, a chip maker. Yet, Apple is on a mission to make sure that it owns the technologies inside of its devices as it moves to compete with the likes of Qualcomm and Intel. Joining us now to discuss our Bloomberg Tech reporter Mark Gurman, who wrote an in-depth look at how Apple has been building its chips business. So Mark, talk to us about how the chips business has evolved here.
Well, it's no rocket business or flamethrower business, but I find it quite interesting, and I know Apple does as well. It's evolved over the past several years as Apple's come out with new chips for each of its devices in successive years. They now have an AI chip. They have all sorts of processors for displays, Face ID, other components, and it's a worrisome situation for the likes of Intel and Qualcomm, two of the bigger chip makers in the world.
Is this part of Tim Cook, who was the COO of Apple, the guru of Apple's supply chain, putting his stamp on the company, perhaps a realization that this would be the better way to go for Apple?
I mean, I have to tell you, Tim Cook deserves all the credit in the world for coming up with, ways to build as many devices as Apple sells, 300 million devices a year. It's now a, several $100 million company. But it was actually Steve Jobs, Tim Cook's predecessor and the company co-founder, who came up with this idea that the company should own the underlying technologies in its devices in order to make better hardware and software for the user to interact with. So this is more of a Steve Jobs decision that has sort of trickled down over the course of the past decade or so.
So walk us through what kind of chips Apple makes now and what they might make in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the list is too long and complex, to list off. You can, please, anyone viewing this can see our in-depth chart and graphics by the Bloomberg data visualization team. It gives a good look at this. But they make specific motion chips for tracking your steps. They make a processor for the Apple Watch and the AirPods to pair over Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. They make the main engine, the system on a chip that has multiple packs of components on it for both the Apple Watch and the iPhone, the iPad, now the HomePod and the Apple TV. They make a processor called the Neural Engine for processing artificial intelligence tasks. And more recently, they have these T1 and T2 Mac coprocessor chips for Macs. And why that's really interesting to our viewers is that Intel stockholders, they might be interested in this because Intel has Apple as its 5th biggest customer, and Apple is clearly working year over year to knock Intel eventually out of its machines into the future.
Now, the chip industry itself is obviously highly competitive. It's also consolidating. How does Apple, and Apple's a huge customer of a lot of these companies, how does Apple taking this on impact the rest of the companies that depend on Apple as a customer?
Right. I mean, two of the bigger companies that may be affected here are Intel and Qualcomm. Qualcomm is already taking some heat. They're in this big patent battle, tons of litigation between Qualcomm and Apple now. Apple is already working to kick Qualcomm out from the modem side of its devices, starting with the iPhone coming out later this year. We've reported they're looking at providers such as Intel and MediaTek to take on modems. And modems is the component that allows the phone to actually connect to the internet, to cellular data, and make phone calls. So they'll be kicking Qualcomm out of there as early as this year. Longer term, we've noticed a ramp up in hiring of former Qualcomm engineers working on modem chips by Apple in recent months, so it could indicate that Apple's looking to that as well. Intel's affected because Apple eventually wants to kick them out of the Macs in order to control more of the underlying tech inside the Mac computers.
And last quick question, Mark. Apple earnings later this week. What are you looking ahead towards?
Yeah, no, Apple earnings, it's going to be fascinating. This is expected to be Apple's biggest quarter ever in terms of revenue. The company is projecting revenues between $84 billion and $87 billion, which would be a rough 10% increase in terms of revenues year over year. We're going to be really interested in seeing the iPhone 10 unit numbers as well.
All right, we'll be all over it. You will be all over it. Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman for us there in LA. Thanks so much, Mark. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder, we're live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.